So where did this doctrine come from? Well, the word original sin was never used in this sense as it relates to all of mankind until about 300 years after the church had started, when Augustine came into power and became a bishop. Background on Augustine, you have to understand, is that he was a Gnostic. Manichaeism was his system of thought for about, I think, 8-10 years. And that's a Gnostic dualism, which taught that everything physical is evil and everything spiritual is good. And because we have a physical body, the Gnostics taught, we are sinful. And what we are waiting for is deliverance from this physical body. And that was their salvation message, was God's going to deliver us from this physical evil. When he converted to Christianity, he sorted out these different doctrines. He came against his former views, but he still held on to some of these concepts, like the issue of sin being something physical. Like we said with Augustine, it was concupiscence, or physical lust. Involuntary physical lust, to Augustine, was in and of itself sinful. And it's common knowledge Augustine had some severe lust issues in his life, and he held on to this view that lust in and of itself was sinful. Well, the Bible says, in James, it says, when lust is conceived, it brings forth sin. It says, but every man is tempted when he's drawn away by his own lust. So the Bible says that lust is temptation. It's not voluntary. It's involuntary. It's physical, not moral. It's temptation, or the internal inclination or bias. But it was not a sin in and of itself. So where did it come from? It originally came from the Gnostics, which was then adopted into the church after 300 years and modified and put some biblical terminology. And it was a bit different from the Gnostics, who said the Old Testament God was an inferior God who created everything physical. Whereas now it was modified and changed and saying, well, instead of it being the result of an inferior God who created everything physical, it's the result of Adam. And that Adam now is the one who brought this physical evil into the world, this constitutional wickedness into the world. So it was modified and put into more of a, you could say almost like it was more of a biblical view, because they incorporated Adam instead of this inferior God. But it was still the same principle. And underlining it was that sin was physical. That sin was not a choice. That you're not responsible for it. You didn't do it. The Gnostics said an inferior God is responsible. Some inferior God forced us into this physical sin. Where the Augustinians said it was Adam who has forced us into this physical sin. So the underlying principle of responsibility and the definition of sin is still the same. It was not found at all in the early church. The early church, they may have used similar terminology regarding original sin, but they weren't talking about the Augustinian view. They taught sin was a result of a free will. That they said we all have the same nature. The Gnostics, because of their view of nature, said that we don't have a free will, that we have a crippled nature. And because we have this crippled nature, we can't choose anything good. If we choose anything good, it's because God gives us a new nature. And that new nature makes us do things good. The early church came against this Gnostic heresy and said everybody has the same nature. You have Tertullian and these other men. It was an Origen who said the Gnostics introduced this doctrine of two natures. And Origen asked the question, he says, well, we see righteous men becoming wicked, and we see wicked men becoming righteous. Well, how does that work? He asked that question. And of course, how did Adam sin? If you need to have some sort of crippled nature to sin, if your nature determines your choices, which is their underlying principle, if your nature determines your choices, how did Adam and Eve and Lucifer sin? Because Adam and Eve and Lucifer had natures given directly by God. And so if they had a good nature, and your nature determines your choices, they should have done nothing but good things. But they didn't. Because the early church says free will is a part of our nature. if you get into the definition, this word nature, again, is kind of like this word original sin. What does nature mean? Sometimes people talk about nature as though it's like some abstraction thing that's inside of you. Then there's other definitions of nature that it means your constitution, the elements that are involved in who you are. The early church said your nature is who God made you to be. And it would include your intelligence, your emotions, and your free will. That's your nature, your constitution, your makeup, the elements that make up your personality. So the early church says we all have the same nature, and everyone's nature includes free will. Sinners are using that nature, they're using their free will to sin. But Christians have used that free will to yield unto God and to obey God. That both sin and obedience, rebellion and submission, don't come from our nature. They come from our free will. Origen said it's not our nature that makes us do evil. It's our free will that makes us do evil, or that we use to do evil. So this view of sin being physical, or as the Calvinists later said, we lost our free will when Adam sinned. And because we don't have a free will, we are forced. Everyone is forced to sin because they don't have the power to do anything else. This view did not come from the early church. In fact, the early church taught the exact opposite. For 300 years, the men that were giving their life in the Rome taught by the apostles, who laid the foundation of the church, came against this type of teaching as heresy. And, that's the history of these views.